Thank you so much for coming today. We're really happy that you're here and looking forward to Tony's talk. I am Mary Kennedy. I'm the director of the Wingate Museum of Art, and we're really thrilled you're here. This lecture today is in conjunction with a new installation at the Wingate by Tony Sonnenberg, our artist extraordinaire here, titled Make Me Feel Mighty Real. I first met Tony a little over a year ago in Fayetteville, where he was a visiting faculty member at the U of A in ceramics. I knew he was a really accomplished ceramic artist, but I was most interested in his installation work. His installations are dazzling and overwhelming, full of crazy objects that combine to make an extravagant and overwhelming experience. And if you head across the way starting tomorrow, we're open on Tuesdays through Saturdays, 12 to 5. You can go and see this very installation. It's amazing. As someone once noted, looking at his installation is a bit like being in a Where's Waldo book. As you look closer, you see more and more to look at. And I really love artwork that's like that. I encourage all of you to see his installation and put yourself in the middle of it. You will never have a better selfie opportunity. Anthony Sonnenberg earned his BA in studio art with an emphasis in Italian and art history from the University of Texas at Austin in 2009. He then earned his MFA in sculpture at the University of Washington in 2012. Sonnenberg has held a myriad of teaching positions and most recently was the adjunct professor in ceramics at Hendrix College. After a lull in creative outlets following the completion of his MFA, Sonnenberg got his first solo gallery exhibition, which catapulted his career and has not slowed down since. He now routinely shares his extravagance, making individuals from far and wide feel mighty real, which is the name of our installation. Please give a warm Hendrix welcome to Tony Sonnenberg.
Thank you so much, Mary. And thank you to Amanda and Lindsay for working with me to get this installation together. And thank you to the Wingate Museum as a whole and Hendrix College for having me do this installation and also come and teach a class this fall. Are there any students that took that? Okay, well. So I don't know how much they like the class, but I really enjoyed working with all you at Hendrix. So my name's Anthony Sonnenberg. Usually I go by Tony. I think Anthony looks better. So you'll see it always written as Anthony Sonnenberg, but it's generally Tony. Like Anthony Hopkins. You ever seen people go like, oh yeah, you know, Tony Hopkins or whatever, and then you know that like they know him. So you can do that with me if you want. Or use Anthony if you want to deny knowing me personally. That also could be helpful for you. So I'm going to give you guys kind of a general, we'll talk about this project in particular, but there's many kind of folds to the work. And so I'll give you kind of just a general overview of everything and what kind of ties it all together. So there's a lot going on. And I've given many of these talks over the years, especially the last couple years because of COVID. So a lot of, people were trying to feel connected and still get contents for their students. And so I was doing a lot of talks digitally. I just kind of get going. And there's a lot going on. And I was just like, oh, man, people are probably getting lost. So I was looking at Instagram and seeing how they were communicating kind of pretty complex ideas through Venn diagrams, and I've always been a visual person over a verbal or written person, so this is my visual artist statement that will maybe help be a guide for you when we kind of get into it. And the way it works is kind of in the center is my art where all these things come together. And the more inner you go, the more kind of specific the stuff that I talk about is, and probably the more often it is in the work. So I was trying to really pare it down, like what at the end of the day is like the core things about it. And I think there's really 4 core kind of catalysts, as I say, are things that get the work going. And it's thinking about beauty, time, death, and desire. and how those things all kind of work together and play against each other. And I think, you see these terms a lot in philosophy and art, broader art history, and I just think they're things that are very important to me in my own experience, but I also see repeated a lot through history, so I know that they are very dependable, deep, and well-trodden paths, which I think are good to have in your practice because it means you have a lot of mileage. Also, so that's like the underpinning of everything. And then you'll see in purple options for emotional tone. I've found through teaching and just through my own artwork that I'm not a person that thinks about things or understands things too much intellectually. I really tend to relate to things more emotionally. So I don't like to read a lot, which surprises a lot of people. I really tend to try to get my information through documentaries because something about it being with pictures and music and in a kind of dramatic mode, even though it might tint the information a little bit, helps me remember it better. So you can kind of see around the edge different kind of emotional places that the work might be, which is romance and between desire and beauty, beauty and time, I think often end up in comedy, time and death, I think are often involved in drama. The work tends to be more dramatic when those things are going on. And then between death and desire is tragedy, and it could be a mix of all four of those. But those are generally kind of some of the places where my work goes. And then you'll see in the green, we'll talk about these even more specifically over and over again, opulence is a big thing that I'm working in, or the appearance of opulence, which I don't have too much to say about, but it's a thing that keeps me fascinated, the aesthetic of it, how to create it, how to fake it, what it means, what it tells us, all those kind of things. And then second would be the idea of the still life. So that's your painting with fruit in a bowl at its basis, but it's very old and very wide. It's one of the oldest subjects in art history. It goes back 30,000 years if you wanted to get really technical about it. But not just the imagery of it, what it is and how it works. It seems to advertise things and it seems to promote opulence, plenty, indulgence, and yet if you were to look into its kind of origins, there are religious undertones of be aware of earthly goods, things that don't last. Unfortunately, my partner's father suddenly died this last week, and we went to his funeral, and these words and these terms are all coming up during the funeral. So anyways, I guess it kind of goes to show that it's not just my work. It's very much out into the world. History is important to me. I think history gives perspective. It really, it's always astounding to me to think that, we all are in our own little magic movie that we're all the main characters of, and there's 10 billion movies going on at any one given time in the world. And then you think about history and how many of those across time, and so I think that gets my mind thinking and kind of not thinking because it's so big. But so in that sense, it helps put things into perspective for me, and putting myself compared to history and the mass of it, but also as a minefield, or not a minefield, a gold field, or a place that I can mine imagery. I think I'm very much a collaborative artist. I'm always working with found objects, but I'm also working with like histories and lives and taking things in. I generally look at like older art more than I do current art. One is because I feel like if I'm looking at current art, I feel a need to compete with it. And so when it's in the past, it's finished and it's something that I can just look at and admire or imitate. But it's also, it's nice to have a 2020 view of something when you're working with it too. So I think that's also really what I like about history. And then finally, myth and memory. You see characters and the way we think about things, and even though these things are not really the truth, I think they feel more like truths to us. And so that's why truth is underneath that, and kind of who we want to be and who we think we need to be and how we remember things. And then, because I said I was going to be quick, so I'm going to try and move along. And it's hard to read in here, but in the very, very inner cornices, we'll say, the most specific of all is my body comes up again and again and again. It's queerness, it's fatness, it's femininity. and how those truths about my body, I think, really shape how I move the world, how I see the world, why I think death and beauty and these things are so much important and things that I'm looking at and thinking about a lot. Art history specifically for for the same reasons why I was talking about I like history, but just even more so and specifically. Flowers, even in still life, that's where flowers come from, but I think flowers especially are very important and consistent for me. I think there's so many different types of work that I make across so many different media, and there's not a lot that tracks through everything, but I think flowers in one way or another are almost always there. And I just think that they tie beauty and death and time and desire and all these things together in such a concise package that is just really unsurpassed for me in the way I think about the world. So they're really something that I love. I'm a big gardener in my life, and in a way, I think if you're a gardener and you're, I don't know, I planted my garden this year and everything died, and and it's a really commonplace thing. You're just gardening, but in another way, it's a really kind of important lesson, a reminder of things die, but there's also life, and all that's tied together, and it's all one needs the other. So I think flowers and gardening are important for me that way. And then finally, found objects, because I think found objects, like history, connect us to other things. Found objects allow us to invent myths and support memories, or invent memories of who might have had those things. And I think also, for many reasons, I've been starting more and more these days to think about objects as less about objects and more about batteries that have energy or connectors that time is not a thing we can traverse, right? We can't go back in time, we can't go forward in time, but we could hold an object that somebody important in the past has held, and in a weird way we feel, and even not in a reality, but in an emotional way that we have touched that person. So I think about that a lot. I said this many times, but not in this context. So the Baroque is a thing that I keep coming back to. I found it really early on in my career. And I was attracted to it because it really got me excited, and I just loved it. And then, like I'm always telling my students, I think what being an artist is, in my perspective, is to go, oh, I like this. And then say, why do I like this? So why I liked it in the end was I was really interested in the time period of these cardinals competing. So these churches and these grand things were sponsored by rich cardinals at a time when the Catholic Church was very rich. It's got colonies at this time. It's raping and pillaging, and you get a lot of gold for it. But also Protestantism's coming in, and they're trying to compete with that. And then within that, there's a lot of personal rivalries and jockeying going within these great families. And so luckily for me as a person of art history, the thing that their cards that they were playing with, that they were measuring themselves by, was how good an artist they had. And it allowed people like Bernini, John Lorenzo Bernini, who, if you've ever been to Rome, it looks like it does because this person was alive and making things. And I also really, and so it was a really good lesson to me about how beauty and power could be extremely connected, and how things that look frivolous, like floating angel babies and golden sunlight, could actually be really important and really affected the way people saw other people and saw how power was situated, whether that was real or not. And it also taught me a lot about what I would call cheap tricks and dramatics and how effective that could be. So you see this light coming down on this angel. Well, he built a false, like a hole, did this whole trickery of architecture to get a hole in there to have a window with yellow paint so that golden light would come down. And he also, you can't see, but he has people looking down that are stone. So he's doing a lot of playing with time and playing with using things like it's a theater set, but it's permanent. And I think I've really built a lot of my own practice in that kind of approach. So here's a piece from about 10 years ago that I call the Apotheosis that I think was really kind of thinking a lot about that. Making things real, I guess, is the kind of the theme of this talk. So I am not a particularly religious person, but I am interested when people who are religious try to depict things that are not necessarily real, right? So what does heaven look like? What do angels look like? What does it look like when somebody, the Bible says that Mary went up into heaven and became a god. What does that look like? I've never, so I really get interested in the idea of, not so much the ideas behind it, but the challenges that these ideas presented to artists and how they use their creativity to overcome it. Or not overcome it, but meet it, I guess would be the thing. So so that's one area that I'm looking at. And we're also looking at still life. Here's two images. On the right is by who is the greatest still life painter of all time and in the world. Her name, it's important to note that it was a woman for, I don't know, who knows for how long. The one thing that women could do in art was paint flowers and do still lifes and do things like that because they would not be threatened by intense carnal pleasures or anything like that. Flowers were unthreatening. And yet, I think, this is a super powerful image. And also what's really important to know about her, she painted at the same time as Rembrandt. She's a contemporary. And famously, Rembrandt famously died penniless. Rachel Rausch never did. Everybody always wanted these paintings, and they knew she was the best at what she was doing. So she, for a long time, never went broke and always sold for higher prices than him, just to let you know that these things, and the fact that she was a woman, did not stop her from at least getting money and comfort in life. So I think, that's a big deal and not to be taken lightly, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And done through paintings of flowers. So that's one idea of how flowers can work in art and what they can do for you and tell other people. And then on the left here is a photograph from, I think, around 2010-ish by a fashion photographer named David LaChapelle. And if you've heard of him before, you've probably heard of him because he was a really well-known Vogue photographer, fashion photographer. And so I really, and he did a lot of kind of like subversive imagery, but also it tells you that he knows how to make things of beauty. The highest magazine in the world of fashion and what beauty should look like comes to him when they need their images, so that, you can take that to the bank as far as how he knows how to operate to make things beautiful. And he knows how to make an image work and all those different things. And I just really love these images because he is so good, and there's a series of these at capturing the same kind of feeling as this, imitating this thing on the left here, or right, or whatever, but doing it in a modern day and doing it to where you get what I feel like is a really nice double interaction. You get the first impression of it, right? Oh, it's beautiful colors, dramatic lighting, and then you start seeing what's in the background, and there's ugly things, there's these chicken feet, and there's beautiful things, actual flowers mixed with fake flowers, and also things of passion in the back here. We have some kind of, the Jonas Brothers, early vintage Jonas Brothers. So anyways, I think a lot of what's happening in this image you will see repeated and taken in my own way in the installation next door. I like to shout out this guy, Jeffrey Mitchell. I worked for him and how to still, he's the person that I talk to when I have a problem in art. What do I do? I go to this person. So he's a friend, a mentor, and a boss for a while. I worked in his studio after grad school when nobody else would take me. He also gave me some lessons about it was not then and it's not necessarily a valued thing in the art world to be sentimental or to have sentiment, to be, I don't know, romantic in a weird sense. I think it a little bit more now. We're very much, I think, reminding ourselves in the last couple of years how emotional as a people we are. But anyways, I just think his work is from the land of Babar. It's little animals, it's roughness and cuteness, but also he accumulates and he amasses and he makes these grand things. And so I think he taught me that you can make grandness and be soft and sentimental and have those emotions in the same thing. And this is an important thing that I tell everyone, and I think it's worth $1 million, is if you're making a sculpture, especially a ceramic one, put it up on a little stand so that it's off the table or whatever it's on and in its own space. And I bring that up, and it seems a little thing, but it's just one of those little tricks that seems like nothing and changes the whole thing. And I think, again, it just kind of goes back to the importance of theatrics and setting a thing up and putting a certain context in place to get a certain idea across. This is the Rococo. This is a famous 3-room hunting lodge. This is not a house. This is not a place that somebody was meant to live in. They were meant to come here and relax after a hunt. And it's 3 rooms, and this is one of the main rooms that they would just come chill in, and it's one of my, I've never been here in person, but it's in my dreams. And when I'm making something across the way, I think about this place all the time, and I think it's because it's light, but heavy, and the shimmer and the gold, and it just gives me a sense of satisfaction that I really go back to time and time again and am always trying to recreate. But I think there's something about the frivolousness of it, the intensity behind the frivolity to make this I mean, it must have taken years and cost millions of dollars, for a hunting lodge, and yet, thank God, they were frivolous because this person growing up in Texas, got to see it and kind of build their whole art practice around it. I'm also super into Antiques Roadshow. I watch it all the time. I wake up and watch it. I go to sleep and I watch it, and it really comforts me. And what I think it does is at its essence, it's about 2 things. It's telling stories attached to objects, and it's talking about things that are very common in the art world that I would categorize wishy-washy, which is like excellence of craft, historical significance, rarity, emotional, content. Is it a beautiful woman sells more than an old than an old man? All these kind of things. And then they explain to you that because of these things, the magic of the market force, which is what somebody will pay for it at auction, means that it becomes this type of amount of money. And then there's nothing more concrete, and everybody understands it and knows what it is, even though it's a weird, crazy concept, than money. And so I just really love how this show, even though it's just bankrolled by insurance companies, somehow manages to do this thing where it goes, here's the world of art and history and all that stuff, and here's the world of commerce, and they don't seem like they should be friends at all. And guess what? They're really good friends because of things like desire. So I'm, as Mary mentioned, I'm best known for ceramics. So now we're actually going to get into the actual work. There's a lot of talking to kind of understand what's going underneath it, and now hopefully we'll go quicker through the work and you can kind of understand all the stuff that I'm talking about. So, best known for ceramics, this is kind of what they look like. This is a piece from about 5 or 6 years ago. It's made in a process that I would like to say I've invented. It's actually several things that I didn't invent that I put together. Which is taking found objects like figurines, but also fabrics and silk flowers and trims and all those kind of things, the bibblies and bobblies of the world. I dip them in a ceramic slip, which is watered down clay. Everything in your house that is ceramic, from your sink to your toilet to your plate, is made from casting slip. So that's what's built on these things. I dip all that stuff in the casting slip and spray more on top and fire it, and everything that's not ceramic fires out. And it's in a weird way, kind of a backwards casting. But what's kind of awesome is so like you can see here on this image on the right, the figurines stay. They don't burn out because they're ceramic, but because they're already fired. And whenever you fire something, it shrinks a little bit. The clay around it starts to kind of crack. So I think it's like if in the first Ghostbusters, those weird gargoyle things, you know what I'm talking about? In the end, the people break out of them. So I don't know, like I kind of think that like the figurines are like these hidden figures inside here. And I really like having them in the ceramics because they, for me, offer a chance. maybe another way is they don't let me get repetitive because I can never guarantee that I can find the same ceramics when I need them. And everybody's for years said, why don't you cast them and then you never have to worry about finding stuff. And I said, no, because one, I like to look. The journey of the looking is very important. The randomness is very important. And thirdly, they're bringing in that emotional thing of this object has stories and may be charged, in parentheses, with an energy that I could not recreate and does not transfer, as far as I'm concerned, into a cast. And kind of fourthly, why cast something when there's so billions of these in the world? I don't need to. It's just adding more onto a hump of stuff. You know, I think it's better in a way to recycle. And you kind of see this thinking repeated time and time again. But it's just another way of this act of collecting. I don't know how that's going to fit into the diagram. It needs to be there, but it's present. It's probably the thing that's even more consistent than the flowers, is everything starts by being found and held in my house and my life until it vibes with something else enough to make sense, to be a piece. Here's a clock that I made last year. It's a broken clock. I've made about 5 clocks. They never work. It makes people mad all the time. But for me, there was 2 reasons. One was a physical problem. I couldn't figure out how to find a place to have the mechanics of the clock. And 2, I thought a broken clock was a better indicator of maybe what infinity could be like. And because it's not really time marking that I'm thinking about, it's more about the immensity of time. And so I think for instance, the dinosaurs are 50, 100 million years old, who knows? That's easy to say, but if you were to try to go, let me count 150 years, let me try to think about how much time that is, your mind would explode. And so I get really into these things about the immensity of things, these things that make us overload. And so a broken clock comes up and up again. This is the European example of what I'm always trying to reach to. This is a factory called Meissen. Meissen, by the way, so there was a period in the 1600s where porcelain was worth more than its weight in gold for a lot of reasons, with a lot of having to do with its pure white thing, because we live in a world where we have white paper. White is not pure white things, pure black too. Are no problem for us to make these days, but back in these days, God, I never thought about that, but probably the only thing more expensive to get than white would have been pure black. And I'm getting off subject, but Meissen is important, should ever get on Jeopardy, because the king of Saxony took scientists and locked them up and said, you will not leave until you invent the recipe of porcelain for me. And that's how Europe was able to figure out what porcelain was and didn't have to ship it halfway around the world. And people were, freaked out about it. And it was like, I don't know, man. Imagine if you were the only country in the world that could watch internet TV. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but how much time in your life do you spend watching TV, and if you were the only country in the world that could do it? So that's kind of a way to think about being the only country in Europe that can make porcelain. Anyways, so again, it's another example of power and porcelain being married and money being married, and at the same time looking completely gaudy and frivolous. This is my version. This piece is the first piece I've ever had get collected into a museum collection at Crystal Bridges. If you haven't been there, it's worth a visit, I have to say. And then so for another period, I got interested. I don't think I got interested in mortuary or mourning things like tombstones. I more accepted and decided that I wasn't going to be not talking about it anymore. And what I really get interested into it is because I think, again, it's very interesting in how this idea of death is a very not pleasant topic. It's not something we really talk about. I just was at a funeral. It was not a pleasant time. And yet, in the 19th century, this is a cemetery in Brooklyn called Greenwood. Brooklyn is one of the prettiest cemeteries in the world. And they used to be considered the sculpture before there were central parks, and it was thought that it was a good idea to have places for people to go. People would go have picnics in the cemetery, and they would go have pleasure strolls in the cemetery. And so you could build a tombstone and bet it would be worth your money because people would see it. And people were spending millions of dollars making these tombstones. And why were they doing it? To show their power, show their wealth, show that they can afford such a thing. But what really kind of unlocked it for and made it interesting for me and want to make work about it is, and to tie it back to my idea of found objects, is you cannot completely imagine what it is to die, because it means you don't exist anymore, and you can't imagine what it is like not to exist. It's an impossible thing. And so the human being has no choice but to invent in their mind some kind of an afterlife. And that can take many forms. There's a book about this, and I forget the title, but one would be religious salvation. Your body dies, but your soul goes to heaven. One is you can leave monuments to have a memory. So you accept your body dies, but maybe your memory lives on. The third is that you somehow translate your body, your mind into a computer or something like that, so your body then goes away, but somehow the essence of you is still alive. And then the third would be you're a vampire or a superhero and you just don't die, which is not real. And so at the same time, I got this teaching job, and I had to really kind of get into ceramics and start thinking about, like, why do I like ceramics? What do I think other people need to know about ceramics? And I started coming back into the idea of functionality again, which is something that I had been really kind of not interested in, something being functional. But then I really opened this idea thinking about tombstones and them playing this very real function, in essence being a proof of your existence, if you really kind of break it down in my mind. And so I thought, ooh, that's really cool. So I started making tombstone-type things and urns, kind of as a way to remind myself and others that not only are these unpleasant things, can they be designed around and outfitted and made easier and played out through physical objects, but it's happened before and will probably happen again. And just because we right now, I don't know, because we have iPhones and think we're better than it, don't like to deal with death until we're in front of it, it's not always been that way. And I think also COVID, has reminded me of that, because a lot of people died. Also, another thing that's important to remember is these big cemeteries that I'm looking at and drawing from come at a very specific time in history. They come 20, 30 years after the American Civil War, when people are having to have such significant trauma that they have to relearn how to deal with it. And basically it takes them 30 years to figure out what they want as these cemeteries. And so I think now with COVID and especially loss of like brown and black lives and that being so prominent in the media and putting death in our face in a way that I think it hasn't been for a while, I'm interested to see what will happen in 20 years as we process it. So to get into this thing over here more specifically, I'm going to talk about kind of what I'm looking going into there, and there's several things going in there. This is an example of of what I would call, and I don't know if it's exactly the right term, Spanish colonial architecture. It's something you would see late 17th, mid 18th century in places like Mexico, Spanish colonies, because there's a very specific kind of religious architecture coming from Italy to Spain to Mexico. But I feel a reverence for it because as somebody who grows up in Texas where things are new and big and there is no history and you have to create a history or build off an existing history and make it your own. There's a lot of different ways that can work. But because you are not the one inventing it, because you are trying to match something away and perhaps outdo it, I think there's an intensity and a sincerity behind it that I am very interested in and trying to recreate and trying to enjoy myself. I'm also looking at things like this. This is, if you've ever seen the castle in Disneyland, that is based off of an actual castle in Bavaria built by a prince who was crazy. And there's a whole long story that I won't get into. But basically, he was in this weird place in history where he had the name of a king. It was right before World War I, when kingships and all that idea thing was falling apart. So he found himself where he was a king, but he had no power, and he had a stipend. So, and he felt that this was not good because he came from a line of kings, and he should be a king, and he's this failure because he doesn't have this power. But also, like I said, he was crazy. These palaces, nobody ever came to them. Nobody was allowed in them. But he would build things like fairy tale castles, which the thing in Disneyland is based on, and he would build this, which is him trying to copy what in his mind would have been the greatest palace in the world, which is Versailles. And if you look at Versailles, it's really ridiculous, but it somehow seems to work. It's got a kind of grand symmetry and scale that works and is a lot and intense and impressive, but in good taste, we'll say. But because Ludwig doesn't have that meter, and he doesn't have people around him telling him what to do and to help him edit and to do all these things, he makes these things, these palaces that are grand and amazing, but you know that there's something not right. And I get really interested in that slight feeling. And it reminds me of this place, which is famously Trump's penthouse apartment in the Trump Towers, which again is if you go past those images, it's trying to quote all the same things and have the columns and have the gold and have the detail and the wood, and it just, I don't buy it, I guess is what I'll say. But he is trying very hard to give the impression, like Ludwig, that he is a person of power and he has a place that matches his power, and you can believe in his projected power that he's trying to give you because he has this palace that matches, right? So surely, one corroborates the other. And I think that relationship between power is something that I'm very interested in making this type of work, which is, I don't know, probably $4,000 of materials and time or whatever, and it's built up over time. But my hope is that it looks like $1 million and that it stuns you and makes you stop thinking for a second and just believing that you want to be a part of whatever this is. I don't know, I guess that's in the end what I'm trying to go for. So I just wanted to walk you through, because this project took 10 years to make. It's been repeated again and again, and every time I do it, I add and build on top and throw more of my own artwork in. So we're going to go through and see all the other versions of it. So here's this version. Here's the last version. This was my first museum show. And what I really learned from this one is I think I tried to go too big, and I spread the stuff out too much, and so I was never really happy with these images. So on this last one, I said, same amount of stuff, but more concentrated. Here, this is me being like, I love the idea of this, but I need more money, I need more time, I need more stuff. And this was one of the first big shows I had after grad school. Every one of these steps has been about 3 to 4 years apart. And then finally, it started with my thesis show at my grad school, which happened 10 years ago. And stuff like the bear has been in every single one. And certain things have been through every single one. So I'm going to move kind of thick. My body coming up here, I do this, the textiles come up again. Again, it was a physical concern that got me here. I wanted something that could ship because I was making all these super breakable ceramics and people were liking them and they're saying, I want one. And I said, I don't know how to ship it to you. So I said, if I want to have a career, I need to make something that I could ship. And these things, you can roll them up, put 5 in a box, squeeze them together and ship them out. But also it was a way for me to deal with my body. I thought, I was looking a lot at Gothic art from 1200s. And there's a lot of religious art going on in there, obviously, reliquary things happening, chalices, all the stuff that they needed for the church. And you'll see them and they look like a patchwork of gemstones. And it's because rich people would come and give these monasteries, whatever, gemstones, and they'd be like, so yeah, this is going to buy you a lot of good energy with God. So good job, man. And they would take all those jewels and then fit them into these religious things, again, to show through gold and jewels. I guess really interested in this idea about, like, you're a Christian, you live in the 1300s. The most important thing to you in your life is that to have a church, you got to have a reliquary. This is the most important thing you can imagine to you. How do you let other people know that visually? Isn't that a really interesting question? And they do it by making things out of gold, taking things that they think are the utmost preciousness and putting them together. So again, I just think that's why I'm coming to this idea of perception. And we get ideas about the way things should be, but how do we tell other people that? How do we make that visible? Anyway, so I figured, what if I put my body in the same light? And I would also contrast it against these very old ideas of kind of beauty, and this is one of the oldest, which is a Roman sculpture of Adonis, I think. Famous because it went into a famous rich person's collection, and because of that, it's known as, it got to be seen and became a kind of a real ideal and icon for what Western Europeans thought was the ultimate idea of beauty. Specifically Western European, not that this goes for everybody. I don't think they would have known that at the time, though, which is unfortunate. I don't match it, is the short story on that. But I feel like I should, so I guess that's why the reference is there, and I think it's kind of about overcoming that and finding and highlighting the beauty that is there. And what these things became is like this piece that I'm doing now, that every 4 years I will make one of these and kind of both document where my body's at and also kind of do an emotional check-in. So the pose of this is taken from a figure in Michelangelo's Last Judgment. It's a person getting dragged down to hell. This was made around 2018. So, I don't know. Trump was in the White House, but even more than that, there just was so much anger and bad blood and nastiness in the air and in the world. And it was feeling overwhelming. So I was feeling a lot of, connection with that person getting dragged down to hell, because it was like, where are we going? And not that we're really out of that moment. Flowers, working with gold things, making crowns, making characters. I was making a lot of this work, which you'll see in the figure, when I was getting interested in Greek myths, because I was trying to trace back the art that I was interested in. So like I said, I was looking at Baroque, and what was the Baroque people looking at? Well, they were looking at Greek myth. So I started looking at Greek myth to try and better understand where they were coming from, and I found a character named Solinus, who is, as far as I know, the only mythological god that you will ever see depicted as a fat person. And he is very specifically a fat person because he raised he raised Dionysus. So he's this weird creature in that he's directly next to the god of indulgence and wildness and the opposite of reason in a lot of ways, but he is unique, and he was used as a kind of character that Nietzsche built this book around, because he comes up in the story of King Midas. Midas is he wants to be Trump. He's like, I want to show I am the richest person in the world, but I want everyone else to know it. And in order to do that, I need to have the things that people most want in the world. And he kept eyeing Midas, and this character is supposed to be very wise, but he's also supposed to be very depressed. And so he keeps asking this character, who he has in his possession for a long story, what this thing is, so that he can go possess it and then be top dog. And Midas will not answer him, and he just keeps getting drunk and badgering and gets more drunk the more badgering he does. And finally he bursts out and he says, "You stupid mortal. The thing that people want most in the world, or that's the most desirable thing for a human being, is to have never have been born, and failing that, to die as soon as possible, which is not the answer that Midas is expecting. He is expecting, go get these cars, Midas, or go get that gold chariot. That's what's going to do it. But why I get really interested in it is because what does that sound like? It sounds a lot like, to me, like the Buddha, who was saying existence is suffering and that the world is suffering and that the best thing for you to do is to get out of the world. So I thought that was very interesting that there was this weird moment of crossbreeding and kind of synergy between the East and the West. Thinking about orchids and flowers, I have a particular love of orchids. I think they're a very good symbol for queerness. Because on the surface, they seem to be a lot about sexuality and their structure, and they seem to be very rare and exotic. But the truth about orchids is that they are the most biodiverse and numerous amount of species of plant in the world, and they have been in existence since before the extinction of the dinosaurs. And not only do they survive the extinction of the dinosaurs, but they say that that's probably why they're so lit now, is because they were able to live and they were like particularly good at surviving in apocalyptic environments. So that you'll see a lot of orchid flowers in particular. I've been really into jewelry in the last 3 or 5 years. I think I was afraid of it because artists are not supposed to make jewelry, but potters are always talking about how the great thing about pottery is that it's so intimate, and it's in your bedroom. Or not in your bedroom. It's in your kitchen. You use it to make food. You eat off of it. It's right next to your body. And I say, yeah, that's true. But if we're going to go by those rules, then jewelry is really more important or better illustrating that idea. So I've really been kind of playing around with how that can work, and so that's where the masks have come in. This is a fear of death mask. This is covered in these fossilized shells that are, again, 150 million years old, 200 million years old, I forget. But when I am feeling my own mortality or worried about my own accomplishments or whatever, I think about these shells and I think about these things have been dead longer than I can literally imagine. And that gives me a little bit of perspective and makes me step away from the cliff a little bit. And I think jewelry does that. The challenge of it is really interesting, but also, like this big installation, wearing jewelry, making jewelry is another way of creating the idea of who you are and figuring out a way to communicate to the world who you are in a way that does not necessarily take money. And kind of pushing this idea to weird places and queering things that I don't know if they've ever been queered. So I was making all these orchid things and thinking about making crowns that had all these flowers going down. I thought, where have I seen this before? And I remembered I'd seen it with people acting like snipers in the woods and wearing these ghillie suits so they can be like the undetectable sniper so they can kill somebody. But I thought they were kind of fabulous and beautiful. And so I've kind of been adopting that idea and comparing my own body to flowers and trying to complete the whole kind of still life idea, but thinking about it, can a still life be something you wear? Can a still life be something you are? We'll see. So this crown here and these bits, these are physically in the exhibition over there. So there are things that are dime store and spray painted. The majority of things are dime store and spray painted, but there's also things like this, which took 3 months to make. I made this during the pandemic. Just very quickly ending up, this is a painting by Hyacinth Rigaud. He's most famous because he painted a really famous portrait of King Louis XIV. What I really find interesting about this thing is that, again, this is a painting meant to convey the status of a person by using things that he felt everybody would know were for rich people to have, which is this amazing amount of flowing fabrics that are silk and velvets, which are very, very expensive. There's gold in it. And also in the background, there's this Greek colonnade. So you know he's in something Greek. He's in a palace. He's in something. So you know this person is wealthy. You know this person is grand. But what do you really know about the person physically? Almost nothing. The only thing of this person that is visible in this image is his face and his little bit of a fat chin and his two hands. Everything else in this image is an invention. And I thought, oh wow, that's really interesting to me, and in line with a lot of things that I'm really interested in. You could, like when everything was getting painted, it was like we are now, where Photoshop is so accessible. You can make your own image up, and I'm not sure it's necessarily a bad thing or a new thing. And that leads me to the last piece I'll show you tonight, which is this video, which you can see playing in the exhibition, and where the exhibition gets its title from, which is "Make Me Feel Mighty Real," in which I just build this environment of kind of fanciness and grandness as I felt it, and just existing in it, while "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real" from Sylvester plays in the background. So the words of that song are very important too, but also Sylvester was one of the first, like, I don't know if he was open or not, and if he called it trans, but he was definitely one of the first androgynous and queer kind of superstars, which means if you're the first of something, you have to invent it, right? So I thought he was a good person to name and have a part of this homage as, this pioneering person of color, queer, possibly trans, I don't know what his definition would have been, creating this world. And so I'm trying to carry on in that same vein. And that's it. Sorry, it was longer. It was 50 minutes, so I kept it. Okay. See, usually there's not a lot of questions because I feel like I
got a question. So in the creation of Make Me Feel Mighty Real, can you talk a little bit about how you go about, you all go in and see this show. I mean, it's amazing, and people say, how did he do that? How did he make that? So could you just say a little bit about how you go about taking on a project that massive?
So basically, it just comes down to the idea of layers. This actually goes back to, like, I think it's a really fundamental thing to know when you're making art. So for instance, like when I taught this class in the semester, I had almost everyone in the class except maybe one person was a non-art major. And so when I was asking them to make, things that I, like, tell me what you want to make and tell me why it's important to you. Like people were getting really, like, kind of deer in the headlights moment. Because they go, like, it's too much. I don't know how to be artistic and make this thing and learn this. I'm like collapsing under the potential greatness that I feel like I'm not going to get to. And I go, you are about 20 steps too far ahead of yourself right now. Like you really got to figure out what it is you want to make and why. And that's really important because there's so many decisions you have to make along the way and so many different ways you have to break something down. And so the more you can know what it is you want and why, the better it is you can understand how to break something down into steps. So as you know, like building it, there's a lot of steps. But it did not, because I've done it so many times, it never really ever felt impossible to me because I knew it could be done. But first it was just like, I got to get the architecture down. And then I'm going to put a layer of cloth. And then I'm going to put another layer, and then just another layer on top of that, another layer on top of that. So it's basically, and another way to think about it, I don't know, I almost don't like to say it because it somehow like makes it seem all too simple, but it's basically like making a flower arrangement. How you make a flower arrangement. You put the greens in first. You make the shape of the thing you want to make with the leaves. You don't even put flowers in first. And then you put in your main points, which are the structure of the plant, and then you just fill in between. And so that's how I did this. I figured out what the structure was going to be. And you have to be really clear about that because you have to learn how to communicate it to people, so they can build it for you. And so Mary knows what I'm doing, so she can trust me enough to like spend the money. And then I put in my greenery, which is the cloth coloring, and then I put in my main points, which is all those kind of figurines and bears and bobcats and pictures, and then I just filled in between.
How do you know when you're done?
For me, it's when I look at it and there's nothing that sticks in my eye is needing to be done, or nothing goes. Ooh, ooh. I don't get that emotion when I'm looking across it. But how do you know when it's finished is a really important question, and I've talked to many artists about it because it's one of those things that is essential to every making process wherever you're at, and it's like different for every person, or maybe it's just so intrinsic to some people it's just hard to put into words. And so the word that I have chosen is satisfaction. It gives me a sense of satisfaction that is really the lifeblood of the entire practice. Because of that feeling is what makes me put up with never being sure if I'm going to have money next year. Never, all these different things. And I is my career going to end tomorrow? There's a lot of like ups and downs in the art world, but I have found that following your joy and learning how to get that sense of satisfaction is the key for longevity, because without it, it's too intense. It's too hard. Yeah. Oh, so you're going to ask that question. I say it that way because I come back to this a lot, and I think about it a lot. On the one hand, I couldn't put it into words. Making it and seeing things like it give me the sense of satisfaction, and I'm still working through why. I like the aesthetics of it. Do I think there should be a King of France again? No. Do I, do I think that what these rich people have to do to make these opulent settings is good? Almost never, no. So there's a real push and pull of negativity about it that I think is very interesting. And I think that's why it's so important to me to show that this, I think also the challenge for me, I think ultimately what I would like to do, maybe pass on to the world, is to show that opulence does not have to be connected to money status. It does not have to belong to the crazy king of Bavaria who builds a castle. It does not have to belong to Donald Trump. If you can be smart enough, and if you can understand the structures of things enough to see through the surface and to understand what it is and how it makes and how you could make your own version of it. I think this is why people get so excited about outsider artists and self-taught artists, because they are able to make these versions of paradise for themselves, these places that they want to be. And so I guess it's not, to answer your question, I think I do like opulence. I think I do like the aesthetic of it. I think I like the feeling it gives me. I do not like the way it has been made in the past, and I do not think it has to continue that way. Does that answer your question? And so I think, because I would ask myself, why did I spend 3 weeks building this and collecting it? And it's such a pain in the ass to help to keep all this stuff together and to move it around and store it. And maybe I just found the answer. I think it's because I want to get people to believe that no matter who they are, they can have a piece of opulence if they want it. And they can have that feeling in their life if they want it, but they got to be smart and ingenuitive.